alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is Stephanie LaVigne, new guest to the podcast and vivid conversationalist. Welcome.
Thank you, Tim. It's so awesome to be here.
Well, Stephanie, tell people a little bit about yourself and the books you write.
I have written a lot of books and published a lot of books under a lot of different subgenres, but what I am known for now is mystery, kind of quirky, what I'd call like a light mystery, and sweet romance, small town romance that I write under a pen name. I decided to keep writing that.
Nice.
Those two fun things. Yeah.
So you say a lot of books. Now, can you define what that means for you personally?
I think
just a ballpark.
Yeah, around 50.
Oh, wow. Okay. You weren't kidding. Nice.
Really short, and some they're getting longer now, but in the early days, I have some super, super short Christmassy books or, or super, super short, like PNR, just certain different things that trying different lengths and trying different paranormal.
Oh, yeah. No, I understand. I think my listeners by now should probably be able to guess what PNR stands for. Paranormal Romance.
Paranormal Romance.
Oh, yes. Paranormal. Which is, I guess, semi-adjacent to some of the stuff I write, but because I write fantasy primarily.
I know so many. There's so many fantasy writers, and it's so cool. And I wish if I read a lot of fantasy, I would read steampunk, and I would love it. I'm into that. I don't have time to read as much as I want to, but I will be reading your books when I start.
Ooh, okay. Well, that's good to know. That's not going to affect the hard questions I'm going to be throwing at you the rest of this conversation, though. You just know how to butter a podcaster up, then, don't you?
Yes, this is how I get out of all of my convictions. No.
I'll read your book, officer. Anyway,
I love your uniform.
So that's a fair chunk of books. I mean, I've written maybe 25 books. I mean, I guess you have a couple of years on me, so I'll get there. I'll catch up.
Yeah, and again, some are super short, and some I'm more proud of. If you're going to call like a 5,000 word book or a 20,000 word book, they're still books. But
when you publish an ebook, it's a book.
Yeah, and so when you're looking at the actual numbers, it's a story, and then some obviously, and now I'm more in the 70,000 word range for what I'm doing now, so it just varies.
That's funny because actually I've written so few short stories that it doesn't change my numbers much to add the short stories in. Add the things that are less than 10,000 words. I'm like, there's not much effect.
Yeah. But when I started it, I also went into it with a business mindset a little bit more because I'm a very creative person, and that was I'm going to say it was one of my downfalls, and by that I mean one of the reasons that I wasn't a professional writer prior to deciding it is time to become a professional writer, and I have to go about this in a different way so that I'm not crippled by my writerly inclinations to be like, I have to create one perfect book. Instead, I'm like, no, you have to learn to produce books and publish books and just treat it differently. And so that was a big impetus to put things out that earlier versions of me would not have been able to do. I would not have been able to overcome the hurdle, and I just had to learn to release in a different way.
Yeah, the way you said that's actually extremely wise. I don't know if you think that's wise. I think that's a very wise way to think about approaching a craft or approaching an art, because you don't. I mean, I don't want to go through the pot. What is it? The making pots thing, where they make one perfect pot. I'm going to do it anyway. With the class that's supposed to be the sculpting like pots or whatever, clay pots, right? Have you heard this one?
I've not.
Okay, so there's this teacher who's teaching a class. He says half the students, you're going to make one pot, make the best pot you can this semester. And the rest you're going to have to make a pot every week or whatever, or every day. I forget what it is. And at the end, the ones who made more pots usually ended up with at least one pot that was better than the people who were trying to make a perfect pot. And that's a great it's a great analogy. I don't know if that actually happened, but it's very true with how writing works, at least in my experience. I mean, I've been writing since I was 13, and I wrote a lot of crappy books first, which is why I don't have that many books out at this point.
Have we all?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, you have to write to, even for yourself, sometimes to learn what you want to write, how you write, and for your writing to evolve. And that's the same with any craft. And that was the benefit of the jobs I did previously before I became a writer. And I was able to look at these creative arts. I was in the film industry, and I was in photography and design, and looking at them as a worker. I was, hired into film, and I'd look at it and I'm like, this is a very creative thing, but it's not at the same time. It's a business. And you have to look at it sort of in a different way. And I remember when I was in film, because I was very idealistic originally, that I was going to write and act and direct and do all the things that I did not do because I was part of a well-oiled machine that produced film, television, advertising content. But I remember thinking when I was kind of in my spare time trying to do these creative things, and I thought, if someone said to me, here's all the money in the world, create the best film ever, I'm like, I wouldn't even know where to start. I'm like, that's so daunting. And I think that we think that we could sit down and write the best book ever or create the best story ever. But in reality, having little parameters, even if they're for yourself or saying, I'm going to produce a lot or whatever, you're actually going to start creating better content than if you had all the time in the world to create the best thing ever. Because that's never going to be done. And you're never going to achieve that.
Yeah, a lot of people in my English degree, when I was an English major in college, I would talk to them and I would say, I'd be talking to people and say, I've written a few books, by that point I'd written maybe 5 or 6. And they'd say, no, I'm waiting for the ideas to strike. Another problem. And it's the same kind of problem. It's the I'm waiting for the idea to get me, and that a classic story of people who haven't written a book yet, right? Or who are looking for an excuse to not write their book.
Yeah, and actually I was listening to one of your podcasts because they're all great, and I should totally have her name in front of me, but she was saying something, one of the authors, and you can probably fill me in, or I'm sorry for not giving her credit.
Let me see. This is going to be my interview
Rachel?
comprehension. Huh?
Oh, actually, Rachel? Fantasy. Okay, I won't even say. But anyway, she said something like most people who are writing, or at least I'm going to say professional, but
was this Rachel Aaron?
Yes, I think.
Okay, so. Yeah, I should have known. I haven't interviewed a Rachel recently. You went into the backlog.
Unless I totally made that up. But
no,
I think
definitely interviewed. That's probably her. Yeah,
she writes fantasy, right?
Yeah,
and that you love fantasy that you love. Mm-hmm. She seems awesome. So she was just saying, it's not a shortage of ideas, because once you start writing books, ideas are just popping into your mind all the time. And so once you get used to it, it's just, and her thing was, filtering through and finding ideas that you can bring to fruition, that you can bring from that idea all the way into real life, or, into a book. But yeah, but in the early stages, you get in your own way. And I mean, I was a queen of that, you come up with all the reasons that you can't do something and write the book. Like you said, the idea is not there. It's like, yeah, that one idea is not there, but write down 20 or 50 ideas and then start one of those and let's try that. And suddenly it's like, oh yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've actually been talking about Rachel's nonfiction book a lot lately on here.
Oh, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's 2K to 10K. I'll mention it again. Everyone can take a shot now. Yeah, it's a book about how she went from writing 2,000 words a day to 10,000 words a day.
I wonder if I bought that. It's interesting.
It was free, I believe, for a long time. I'm not sure if it is now.
I love books on business development, craft, personal development. I love nonfiction resource books. I am a resource book nerd, like to the extreme. So I that sounds kind of familiar, actually, from maybe a year or two.
It's terrific. It's also one of the most popular. It was one of the most popular books in its subgenre for many years, actually, for an ebook anyway, relatively speaking, like at least 4 or 5 years.
So now I'm going to go look and see, and if I did buy it, I'm going to re-listen to it because I usually listen to.
Oh yeah, the audio. Yeah, it's pretty short. It may not have come out in audio because it was originally a series of blog posts. But anyway,
sometimes I still make my computer read stuff to me.
Anyway. Oh, now you're speaking my language, because one of my drafts on my books when I edit a book is to listen to the book out loud. and it's just read to me in a monotone, dead robot voice, and it actually works really well because the robot voice is not going to upsell anything. You know, it's an awful voice. It's not if it sounds bad when the robot says it, you know it's bad.
Yeah.
I mean, or at least if it sounds good when the robot says it, you know it's good. That's actually more the corollary because it's going to sound worse than it would sound to if any human read it.
Yeah, I often employ Samantha. You know the AI. I am Samantha. But I catch typos, believe it or not. I mean, I have professional editors, but that I use after before it goes to publication. But it's amazing that I could look through something or read through something a million times, and then I have Samantha reading it to me, and I'm like, oh, I go back over, and I'm like, oh man, or like you said, I'm like, why did I write that? Why is that?
That's why so many people, editing is such a bad reputation among authors. But I actually grown to really like it. It's a very simple process once I get into the mood for it. I can just sit there all day and listen to the book. Or it won't take all day, but you get the idea.
Listening, I think, is a big game changer. And I just downloaded a new app. I think it's called Edit Out Loud or something. And I have not used it nearly to as much as I should yet, but I will. And where you could upload any document, because that's usually with some of the other programs an impediment to me using it. Yeah. But because I'm always like, oh, I have to bring it into this program and software. But I'm like, wow, it's amazing what a difference it makes to, even if you're making your dinner or something like that, and you can listen and you're just sort of in a different mind, headspace, and one of my books right now is being professionally narrated. And it was so interesting. I was like, wow. She's really good. And I'm like, I wish that this could happen way earlier because I would have cut out so many lines.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, could you do this without me paying you?
Could I just do this pro bono? Pro bono narration. Yeah.
You would be saving my listeners or readers so much just extra verbiage.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't necessarily think it's all bad. Sometimes the extra words actually clarify things if you're not hearing it. I'm not saying. What you're talking about. I'm sure.
I am a wordy person by nature. I love words. I like to make up words. Sometimes people don't know in the context of a sentence what I'm talking about. Sometimes it doesn't even have to do with the made up word that they don't know what I'm talking about. But no, I don't know. There's just sometimes. Like I just some little repeats. I remember I was like, oh, why did I mention that twice? It just wasn't necessary, but nobody caught it. I didn't catch it. Just like little things that you thought, oh, that could be tighter. And you didn't, I didn't catch it. They don't catch it until I hear it. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Yeah,
which is why, exactly. That's why I would listen to it. Also, I find listening speeds up the editing process. Now I'm doing it as my first edit pass, which is kind of crazy. I never thought I'd get there. I was like, okay, so I'll just do it because then I can get through the whole book lickety split. And usually I'm looking at the book as I go. Like I'm scrolling through the file. Because the program I use is, I think, Zabaware Ear. It's this free little program. And when you just... And there's a setting on there that you can just, as soon as you copy any text, it'll automatically start reading it.
Oh, nice.
So I just go into my Scrivener document, the individual document that the chapter's in or whatever, and I can hit Control A, Control C, and I just click one more time. And it started reading, and now I'm no longer selecting the text, so I can just go through and make changes.
That's great.
It's actually really speedy, and obviously some people might complain about the editing occasionally in my books, but that's mostly not the fault of me as an editor. It's more the fault of me as a dictator in that period. Nobody really complains about the editing in the books I typed, even when I go kind of fast through the edits. And
I will tell you, it does not matter how many times a book is edited, whether by the writer and an editor. Sometimes I've even had more than one professional editor edit something, and every time the ARC, like the advanced readers, I have a couple real eagle-eyed ones. I'm like, man, a book should never go out because they always find something. There's just always something. It's incredible just how...
It should never go out, but it really has to.
Yeah, exactly.
They all have to, but none of them should,
Yeah.
That's it. It's almost there's a metaphor in there somewhere.
Yeah. That's and even one of my best friends, she's run a women's kind of music empire, but she started a magazine called Tom Tom Magazine that focuses on female drummers, but it's much larger than the magazine. It kind of grew beyond that. And she used to say to me, because we've known each other like our whole lives, and she's like, you just have to put things out. She's been really like we each have our strengths, and we always kind of pushed each other through the years. And she would say, you will put out one thing that's perfect, and I will put out 20 things that aren't perfect, but they're out there.
Yeah.
And so that was one of my, and she's like, and I'll get better and I'll learn. And she's like, yours is going to be better than mine, but you'll have one and I'll have 20 and I'll have learned and I'll move forward, whatever. This is a long time ago. And that was not a long time ago, but I'm still working on that. But that was a huge thing for me to say, okay, this is something I need to work on and be willing to put imperfect things. I'm going to do my best. And I, try and not have typos because, of course, I'd never want that. But instead of having that crippling me and handicapping like the ability to move forward, it's like, okay, just do your best, move it. And someone will find something. If they find something that's imperfect and you can choose, then you can fix it. That's a great thing about digital stuff these days, and then move on, my friend.
You just got to move on. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And I mean, sometimes I've been guilty of this before, obviously, like the time I dictated the whole 80,000 word book and then threw it all out and said this was the wrong book and and then I did another version of the same book immediately.
Did you like the second version?
Yes, I did.
Oh my gosh.
See, the problem with the first book, and this was like the year before last. No, it was last year. It was at the end of the pandemic. At the start of the pandemic, I was just finishing up So it was 2020. I was finishing up book two. No, it was the start of 2020. I realized I wasn't going to be able to do anything with the original version.
You are a superhero.
No.
That had to have been so emotionally difficult.
It wasn't actually. This is the weird part. Like if I'd have known that I couldn't have thrown it away if it had been hard. You know what I mean? Like
did you rewrite it? That's amazing.
Well, it wasn't a rewrite. It was a different story. It used the same characters, the same setting, but the story was completely different. That's why I decided I couldn't edit that one and fix it, because I realized these are the wrong scenes. These are the wrong events.
Yeah.
And this is not these characters aren't turning out the way I wanted because I'm not putting them through the stuff that I needed to go through. And I could even look back, because I'm a discovery writer, I could look back at basically the plan and the guidelines. And I'm like, I just went off I made a Marvel movie instead of making a book I wanted to read.
Interesting.
I mean, I know a lot of people like Marvel movies, but I'm not a huge fan of them anymore. And I just can't, that kind of samey, that kind of vibe of like, this is an action thing and then we're going to meet up and fight at the end. It just wasn't, it was wrong for this book. And it was high fantasy, and that's a pretty normal vibe for high fantasy than what I'd created for that first 80,000 words. But I'm like, I can't do both of these, so I might as well I want to do the one I want, Yeah.
And you should also, you should always trust your instincts. I will say that, not like your writer, like fragile ego human instinct, which is the one that gets us all in trouble. That's always there. That's like, this is terrible, or this is wonderful. Don't cut out any of those words. And you're like, no, that got to go. That person who, but the other, the one that is honest, like this isn't the right book and you have to move on. I just recently, I didn't do what you did, but I had been planning this world for so long, and I had these characters developed for so long, and there was this whole big mishmash where somebody else wrote the book, and it was insane. Like one day I looked at the bestsellers list and I was like, that is my
wow. Really?
It was like nuts. It was, and I was like, and
that's gotta be painful. Yeah.
It was so specific. I don't even know. I sat outside. I was like having an anxiety attack. I'm like, oh no, I took too long. And I was trying to figure out how this person got a hold of my notes, which I knew clearly did not happen. But it was just so exact that it was insanity. Down to a version of the fictionalized name of the town based on the town that I live in. It was insane. Yeah, it was so.
Wow.
And I was doing a similar fictionalized name of. It was just like what. But I've heard, I think Elizabeth Gilbert or so other people say, they have said, like, if I don't write a book, basically I will often find, if I take too long to write it, I'll often find that someone else writes it. And like the muse went elsewhere. I was like, I would like to be written. So I was like, whoosah. But going back to your point and your heroic retelling, I remember, there's that whole thing, you have to kill your darlings or, sometimes. And after I was deeply sad for an hour, and I walked around the block in my pajamas and the dark of night, being like, oh, it's whatever. But I thought, okay, well, I could either just let it go, and I had stuff written in, or I guess, like, what would I, from a business side, what would I do? And also from a life lesson to anybody else, I'm like, okay, figure out how to do it better. Not the same thing. Figure out how to go back
punch it
to
up
the
another
board.
level.
And then one day, it took me a while, like a couple weekends of being like, it doesn't, what do I do? And then I had to kind of kill off the version of the main character and the relationships that I thought. And then I was like, yes, this now is going to be better. It's kind of that thing where I think I was actually, the reason I never wrote it probably was it wasn't quite right. I was stuck on the idea that I had.
Now that is something, a feeling. It's this feeling like I'll get all the time of like, this is not correct. But I wouldn't know. I can't name it at the time. Usually, it takes forever to name it. It could take a week or a day, depending on what the problem I'm dealing with. It could take a month. Yeah. It could take a while. It could take, actually, literally, for the book I'm about to release, or will have released the week this show comes out. It took 7 years to get the, and like literally, I had 50,000 words. I wrote 50,000 words of this book in 2014. And I thought, I've got to finish it. I've got to get this book done. But at the time, I was writing kind of more traditionally focused. So I'm like, this book is fantasy. It needs to be 100,000 words long at least, right?
Yeah.
Well, I put it on the shelf. Now I'm an independent author. 2021 rolls around, and I've been working on it here and there, just tinkering and having ideas about it. And then I'm like, oh, wait, this is how you do it. And 10,000 words later, the book's done.
Oh, yeah, see?
The book is at least rough drafted, of course. It's still being edited.
You're gonna have I have, I want to say 2.5 like that. And one of them is the one that I was just talking about that has chapters. And it's on my upcoming list to dive into that series, to start the series. I'm kind of doing an offshoot because I'm doing a serial right now that will play into the world. But yeah, I have a couple of those that I'm like, one day, I'm hoping soon. So you'll inspire me, like, just finish it, just go back and finish it and make it what it needs to be.
Yeah, going back, I mean, it's really an interesting situation, honestly. When it's one of my favorite stories now. It's like it's one of my favorite stories about writing. It's like, yeah, that book can sit there lying dormant for years, and then finally, like, oh no, it's this is how you fix that. And it's something really silly. Like, I'm like, I just went back and I read the beginning. It kind of happened because I actually serialized the first chapter of that on this podcast. Not serialized. I read the first chapter of that book, Temple Theater Book 1. It's called The Forgotten Mask now, but it was just Temple Theater when I started it. I read the first chapter on this podcast, I think somewhere around the New Year. And I asked people, because I read it in a couple other first chapters from some of my other work, and I asked people, what do you think about these? And that was the one that got the positive feedback. And so that's why I'm like, maybe I should think more about that.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, yeah. That's good. Having that little a
little confidence boost, Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. So that is really cool. And sometimes, like, it is just structuring it in your own head. It's so hard to let go, and it can take years to get that clarity, which seems insane, but sometimes that's what it takes. However, it must feel amazing. You must be like, yes. I feel like these couple ones that have been like waiting forever. One day I'm gonna be like, I can't believe it.
Exactly. And I've had world build, because I love world building. I love building my fantasy settings and my sci-fi settings and all that nonsense. And I have settings that have sat on the shelf, like my Demon Hunter setting, the Demon Hunter Epic Fantasy Series, that sat on the shelf. Well, not really. It sat on my desk. I was tinkering with the setting for 10 years or more. And then I finally wrote it, 2019. Or was it 2018? No, it was 2019. Yeah, summer 2019. About now is when I finished the first book. Or started. No, this is when I started it, but I would have finished it before the end of July, the rough draft. Nice. Because that was the first book I dictated, and it needed a lot of editing. But by now, it's pretty good.
So you dictate most
not
of your
anymore. Not anymore. I did it for about 2 years.
And I didn't do it lately, so that's interesting. So why'd you?
I switched back because I realized I'm not that much faster when I dictate. It takes 3 times longer to edit it, but even if I can write twice as fast, and so the numbers are a wash there. And then also I enjoy typing more. I get more into the story when I'm typing because I have more time. When I'm dictating, I do 6,000 words an hour or more. And that's
Wow.
a lot of words. That's like 3 chapters an hour. I'm like, I can't keep this up. It feels I kind of burnt out on dictating, even though it was nice because the huge advantage of it is that it shuts off my inhibitions a little bit. I'm like, I'm just babbling. As you can tell in this podcast, it's easy for me to talk.
You and I both.
Exactly. We were talkers.
Yeah. I know. But, and that is interesting. I when I started auto dictating, I was dictating. It was more for necessity because I was not getting the time in front of the computer that I needed. And so I'd say, okay, well, I'm in the car. You know what? I'm going to write a chapter. And it's interesting because I do feel like I would just jump in. I just would have to start talking. And I'm a very visual person, so I can just picture the scene in my head and I just kind of go with it. And that was really helpful. But then it was interesting because I start thinking, I pay more attention when I type. So my sentences are probably more lyrical and better if I'm typing. Cause like you said, I'm paying a different type of attention, but at the same time, I'm less inhibited when I just start talking. Cause I, press record and I'm like, oh, well, I better say something. And then I just do. But oh my gosh, the editing is insane. The translation of what, I would say what Siri thinks I said. I'm like, why would I have said that? I'm like, oh,
yeah. I mean, it's not just for me. It's not just a mess. It's like literally what you're saying. Like without any thought. Like that was my whole thing. It's like I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to tell the story.
Yeah.
And it makes some weird things happen. And honestly, that's I think how I ended up with an 80,000 word book that I didn't want. Because that's a lot of book. Even when I've never done a book that long that I threw out before. And then I'm like, I went a long way here. But I mean, granted, that's only 15 hours of dictation for me. But
that's pretty good.
That's a lot. It's a fair chunk because it's, again, a whole book. But
yeah. But I guess if you think of it, as almost the initial outline, or, since you did turn it into something else, it was almost like a rough draft, even though you said, the direction changed radically. But at the same time, it's like you've kind of gotten probably to know the characters better, and you probably got to know so much more about the story that it was like, okay.
It's true. I knew a lot of different aspects, but there's a lot that changed too. Like I just I'll rip this out. I need to add this point of view character who's a character in the whole book who wasn't at all present before. It's that kind of thing. Like it was a quite different retelling.
Interesting.
Because there's a couple characters that this is Shadow Prince is the name of the book, and and it's the second book of the series. But this is kind of an episodic series. So, like, it's almost like and Shadow Prince is like a mystery where the prince of the city has been murdered by a mysterious shadow. And then, and as well, and then also his second in command guy, like his best friend, who was his regent, who would have been the regent, also dies the same night, killed the same night by the same same monster, presumably. And his wife, who hated him all along because it was an arranged marriage, of course, fantasy settings, that kind of garbage, is one of the main characters, and she's she's what's called in the setting an outrage poet, which is like a comedian, basically, somebody who tells jokes makes fun of the nobility in poetry.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's a long way of saying like she didn't have anything to do in the original version of the book, and she's like the main character because she's not like an action star character. She's making fun of people. She's playing games with people.
That's so fun, though. And
she's a great character, but and that's one of the main reasons I was like, wow, she's doing nothing for like 2/3 of this book in the original version. And I had to go back and I got a lot of other characters, but that's like, if she's gonna be on the cover, which she is, I need to make this book actually, about her.
Like, that makes sense. People will be like, wait, who is on that cover? Oh, that woman in the last 4 chapters? That minor character.
Exactly. The woman wearing the dress made out of teeth? Come on.
Yeah. Who was she?
Yeah, that's weird.
I want to flip this. I'm going to be interviewer flip switch roles or something. Because everyone always asks me, since you write fantasy and then you write some with mystery, do you find it more difficult to write mystery versus fantasy? Like, because adding the mystery element, is that
absolutely find mystery more difficult. I'm not a natural mystery writer. Yeah. I find being coy is one of my big weaknesses in writing fiction. So if I won't tell enough, I won't give enough detail or enough information. And so with mystery, it's really easy. Like, I know the answer, but you never will. And so it's really hard for me to. And that's kind of my mindset if I was writing a mystery when I was a kid. And so, I mean, holding back all the information is not how to write a mystery, though. Obviously, I mean, as a writer yourself who writes that kind of thing.
Yeah,
you know
it is hard trying to figure out. I mean, I actually am someone, I like surprises, just even in general. And so I'm someone who will hold or want to hold everything out and just be like, surprise, giant surprise. And so I think to some degree in mystery, the fact that my brain is so tangentially wired, it kind of works because I can drop a red herring or things like that I don't know how to structurally plot that out all the time. I mean, I do try and outline stuff, but my brain wants to be like, haha, hee hee. And so it kind of, some of that stuff happens naturally, but yeah, I will think something's overtly obvious.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to put it in because that just tells it. And it's like, no, Stephanie, like when you think something's overtly obvious, it is the most subtle of hints. And just in general, like I have, so it's good because I've had to force myself kind of to, as you put it, like, I like that phrasing, but like to be less coy with information, be like, no, put a little,
it's not fair if your readers don't know anything,
Yeah.
You gotta know.
I want to figure stuff out when I'm reading a mystery, right? I'm like, I want to be the brilliant detective being like, haha.
That's why. Actually, that's one of the reasons I'm semi hesitant to even say Shadow Prince is really a mystery. It's it's a fantasy story, and there's a mystery element to it, but it's not something that's very easily uncovered. I don't think so. It's not true. It's more of a surprise event at the end at that point.
But you should still market it as such because it is very valuable to be able to cross promote some of those things.
I'm guilty of doing exactly that. So,
well, good. No, it's good. I mean, it also sometimes tells the person, this is going to have a little bit. I don't know. It's hard because it's hard to sometimes. I don't know. I even find mystery to just be like, oh, is this enough? Is it mystery enough? Is it romance enough? Is it sci-fi enough? Like, but then when you don't, if you do too much, you're like, oh, is this cliche? Is it too much? And so it's like, you know what? I get tied up in that sometimes, or especially with mystery now because I'm only starting to actually write it and publish it.
Okay.
Even though I've read it for years and I know what I like and things like that, but I'm like, oh, I don't want to let anyone down. I don't want them to, think that it's this and then it's different, and
right. No, I see what you're saying. And honestly, mystery is one of those genres that to me, I've heard it described anyway this way, is that it's very easy to tell when you failed at it.
Oh, great.
I mean, like the readers will be with a reader, at least with a given reader, the reader who's like, well, I can never have guessed that. That's kind of a fail. And also the reader who gets it way before you intended them to get it, that's also a fail.
Yeah, but there's so much. It's interesting because with romance, I never planned to write romance before I started writing romance, and there's so many sub niches, right? There's just so. I mean, and I'm sure I'm around a lot of. I'm virtually around a lot of fantasy writers, and because I did paranormal, it's interesting because I'm like, oh well, fantasy is so nuanced. Also, in romance is like, gosh, there's just so many sub niches, but at the same time, the through line I kind of feel is the same because you want to have that romance story, but with mystery, it's weird because, again, maybe it's just because I'm just delving into building a mystery brand a little bit more, even though that's been the plan all along. But until you start having books, but it's like, okay, well, this is cozy mystery, like. Which I have some cozy mysteries, but I wasn't. I mean, one series I was setting out to write a cozy mystery, and then the other one I was kind of doing a crossover. But then it's like my other stuff is like, well, what if it's funny, but it's not it's not like cozy necessarily, It's like, but it's also not hard boiled. It's like, I would always say Janet Ivanovich. I'm like, but what is she, for example? Like, what is that where it's kind of funny, but it's also not, there's just these weird, unclear lines. And so I'm always like, it's a mystery, but I'm like, there's a lot that is under that genre.
It's a tough one because all genre is kind of just a category construction, and nothing's a perfect fit, really. I mean, except unless you're shooting for a perfect, like I don't ever shoot for a perfect genre fit. And that's why I ended up with a book that has giant mechanical monsters and is still an epic fantasy, or at least a high fantasy. You know, it's giant mechanical monsters fighting gods and people who fly around on fans. It's that kind of nonsense. Like old school paper fans, by the way, not like rotary fans.
I'm
anyway,
glad you clarified.
Yeah, it's important for the visual.
Yes, no, it is a totally different visual. But yeah, and I one thing with me is I found that I am either rebellious or oppositional by nature, and I have to try and rein that impulse in, because you can't, or I can't market. Again, I have to find like this balance between marketability and creativity, and I find that giving myself the parameters is helpful now at this stage. It would be like, okay, you know, work within this and try and do your best within this, because if not, I will create things that it's like, oh, like even in paranormal, I did some, and I don't tell that pen name, but I remember, every day I can look at my books and I'm like, I thought that, you know, that are selling. And I'm like, this one series was so awesome, but it was a little too confusing, the things it combined, you know, it was like, but it was interesting to me, but I'm like, but the reader couldn't tell right away. It's like, wait, is it, you know, young adult? Is it steamy? Like, where I think that's, I had 2 series and one does really, really well because it's pretty blatant. And one of my friends who's a big paranormal romance writer, she's like, this is what you know, you have your guys on the cover and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, but what if we instead put the random guardian angel on the cover that I threw in there? It was like hilarious. And then in his like the overarching character, you know, like, so I have these, I'm going to say bad impulses. And I think on one hand, it can make things that I do unique, but at the same time, it can kind of like, that.
Yeah, not always a good decision.
Yeah, like, so I have to look out for myself, my own inclinations, and find a way to be unique without going off the rails.
Speaking of off the rails, we are just about out of time. We've actually gone a little bit over, but this has been a lot of fun.
That was so fast.
Yeah, no, time flies when you're having fun. So, Stephanie, tell people where they can find your books and other stuff online. Anything else you do, you know.
Yeah, you can basically you can go and find my website, stephanielavigne.com. Super easy to spell. Just look in the title. It is not easy to spell, but that would lead you to any of the places. All my books are on sale on Amazon, and I am on all of, I hope, your favorite online platforms like BookBub, Goodreads, Amazon, or Instagram, or Facebook. Any of those, you can find me. I don't know how to Twitter very well.
That's cool. That's cool. I'm still learning Twitter. I'm getting a little better at it. Yeah. But anyway, yes, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's been great. As for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com, soon tnfantasy.com/books for my books. Or actually, I don't think you have to do /books. tnfantasy.com will take you to my books page eventually, but not yet, because I need to figure out the redirect still. It's been a bit. And but currently, timneederwriter.com or mentalcellarpublications.com, to repeat myself. And then you can find my books on amazon.com, an ebook, and you can find also the paperbacks wherever fine paperback books can be bought online, print on demand. Thanks for listening, folks. Stay safe out there. Oh, one last thing. Sorry, got to do this plug. You can find Warrior Online on Kindle Vella right now. That's my Kindle Vella story. It's out. It's being serialized now. It's game lit. And there's a little bit of romance in there, but mostly it's about artificial intelligences switching places with people and taking their place in the real world. So AI from like a first-person shooter game become people. It's a weird one, but I think you'll enjoy it, so check that out. I'll put the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, folks. Have a good one, and I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
That tears it.